I insert my key into the lock, twist it, and push. When I arrive through the front door, I find Keith Jarrett. He is lying on his back, facing the ceiling, beneath a letterbox. His body is flat apart from one leg, bent in the middle, sticking up. A flag indicating consciousness. He blinks and breathes but is unresponsive. I wonder whether he arrived today or, if not, how long he has been here without me noticing. I put my bag and other things down next to him on the floor. I see his eyes swivel in their direction. The body of Keith Jarrett has presented itself to me here as material. I cannot definitively determine the absence or presence of the mind of Keith Jarrett. In light of this, I waste no time in claiming the body as mine, executing the necessary modifications to meet my needs. I peel off Keith Jarrett's clothes piece by piece to reveal his middle-aged pinkish skin with some small patches of hair. He stays still, but as I move around him, restlessly shifts in my perspective, a fragmented, composite body. I try placing Keith Jarrett's limbs in different constellations around his torso. I hold them at the joints to lift them and then let them awkwardly flop back down, giving way to gravity. I test the limits of their flexibility, pile them, bend them, stretch them. I take my finger and place it inside one of the gaps I find in Keith Jarrett, in one of his nostrils. I remove my shoes and prod him with my right foot, pause and allow his loose skin to gather like sand in the spaces between my toes. The outer layer of him feels strange in relation to the linoleum, less human than plastic. I begin to slide my foot under Keith Jarrett's right shoulder and flex it to gain some traction on his skin. Using the strength of my lower leg, I hoist him up slightly from the floor and then grab him with my hands. I hunch down and squat behind his small body, wrap both arms around his torso and squeeze his lungs in Heimlich-style manoeuvres. I wait just long enough between squeezes for him to draw breath and then tense sharply, listening for the Keith Jarrett-shaped snorts and exhales that arrive extruded through the particularity of his esophagus. I take Keith Jarrett under his arms and drag him along the floor to where the room moves up along the vertical. He's surprisingly heavy. I turn him so that his face side is propped against the wall, exposing a good blank area of back flesh. Then find some rudimentary equipment, a scalpel and some Indian ink. With these, I begin to tattoo into his surface. If he responds at all during this process, it is only in the form of some non-verbal grunts. I etch long, deliberate lines into Keith Jarrett's skin, working horizontally so that along his flat planes, his front and back, he looks like writing paper, to which the side of his body forms a margin. When I'm finished, I varnish him to make him waterproof. The floor beneath and between us is slippery with blood and ink and varnish, insoluble particles of Keith Jarrett and not Keith Jarrett mixing but not combining. I execute care not to slip on it or to get Keith Jarrett dirty. I grab him underneath his arms again, where the varnish is still tacky, and drag him to a clean part of the room. He paddles his legs, making some gesture of resistance. Scuttle marks form a dappled path where the body has travelled. I lay him down on his back and notice that the flock wallpaper has embossed its pattern into the face that forms a part of, is a constituent of, the thing we are still calling Keith Jarrett, despite his obvious vulnerability to modification. His epidermis yields to the floral regularity. It renders him less recognisable. I get a mop from the kitchen and clean up the mess I've made with Dettol and hot water. I wipe Keith Jarrett down first with a cloth and systematic utilitarian movements. Steam rises up from his varnished skin. I hesitate for a moment and examine what remains of Keith Jarrett. Standing still above him, I half shut my eyes so that he becomes tonal and whole, a readable cartography of a Keith Jarrett landscape. A body densely two-dimensional. Then I open my eyes wide and move my face close to him so that his skin fills my vision. He grows more opaque the closer I get, the less sense he makes as a complete entity. I feel a little regret when I think that this might be the only Keith Jarrett, that this one here on my floor is not a copy but the original. That would mean that I have irrevocably modified the only Keith Jarrett in existence. The finality of this gives me a sense of acute unease. I remember, and am consoled with the notion, that human cells are fully replaced in 7-year cycles. This must mean that there is something fundamentally, foundationally Keith Jarrett-y within Keith Jarrett. He is a band that has replaced all of its members but becomes a clone of its former self. His best work may have been performed by a whole different group of molecular components, forming the circumstance calling itself Keith Jarrett. He is a sturdy idea of a thing that can withstand cellular regeneration and therefore also my authorial rewriting. The etymological root of improvisation is unforeseen happening, the unexpected. To speak or act simultaneously, extemporaneously, is to carve out of time a baroque, ornamental state of presentness, where the body speculates and reproduces and amends. Discord, to kill time through the executing of deferred excretions. I think about an interview I heard once with Keith Jarrett before he arrived on my floor. In it, he discusses how he began playing music. He describes putting a record on as a teenager and beginning to play the drums in the gaps in other people's music. Their complete composition becomes a frame for his.